Good morning, everyone. My name is Ramanujam, and on behalf of the organizing committee of TART, I welcome you all to, well, okay, yes. So that is just a conspiracy to make sure that Burkhard is not heard. Okay, so I don't have any particular announcements to make, except that please look through the information sheet in the bag that contains a whole lot of information. And I hope that most of the questions that you might have are answered there. Just one or two bits of information to underline, namely that for internet access in this room, there is a procedure that's put up outside. But the short answer is that you need an email address to enter. And that, if you look at, there is a list of volunteers with phone numbers and email addresses. There is one name listed along with computers and internet access. That email address is what you need. So this is a procedure that's put up outside, but this is the shortcut to that. And of course, we'll make sure that Wi-Fi doesn't work so that you listen to the talks. But yes, okay. And then volunteers are around. Now, in general, if you see a green dot on the badge, that's a person that you can harass. So feel free to stop people with green dots to ask questions or ask for any help. I think that should do it. And there is an excursion to Mahabalipuram day after tomorrow, for which, if people would like to go, please sign up at the registration desk. And so if there are any questions, any help needed at all, please contact us. Thank you very much. And I hope we'll have a pleasant conference. One last bit about this lights going off in between. Now, Chennai is going through Tamil Nadu, the state, is going through a power problem. There are like many power cuts. So the changeover is automatic, but it takes a little bit of time. It's visible. So that's what you might notice very often. Hopefully that will not cause any crash, but you might find some dimming and going off of lights once in a while. But hopefully it will not be too disruptive. So now let me welcome Joe Halpern, the chair of the first session, to introduce this.
He thought he was all done. Being program chair, his work was all finished, but he discovered he had all sorts of extra work to do, and I know that he was preparing his talk literally after flying in and arriving in Chennai at 4 a.m. The next day he was up, severely jet lagged, but working on the talk. So let me thank him for all of his extra efforts and really filling in at the very last minute. And I'm looking forward to the talk. So, Burkhard.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to switch on my microphone first. So can you hear me? Okay. Okay, so I cannot really substitute Pierpaolo Battigalli in some sense, because he usually talks about his latest research on dynamic epistemic game theory, and even if you would have sent me the slides, I think I would have a hard time to present it to you. So I will talk about something else instead. I will talk about modeling approaches to reasoning about unawareness. So some people in this room actually have worked on this, so I think maybe it's a good topic for talk. Actually, it is a talk topic. Okay, so it's a typical talk topic because now there are both approaches in computer science and in economics. So here are some papers. So the similar paper is Halpern 88, and then there are many other papers. So they are more in computer science, AI, philosophy. And here are some papers by economists. So the motivation for working on awareness is a little different for economists and computer scientists. So I think for computer scientists, the original motivation was to model logical non-omniscience. So and they basically proposed a very flexible approach to do this. And for economists, they are a bit more narrow-minded. So they basically focused immediately on a particular notion of awareness. Okay, and this notion is typically understood as you lack conception of some event. So you cannot conceive some events. And this is different from uncertainty. So for uncertainty, you basically don't know what event occurred. And for unawareness, it's you cannot even conceive of these events. Okay, so this is the notion of awareness that economists were interested in. Now, the different motivation also is reflected a little bit in their taste over modeling approaches. And I will try to explain these differences, and hopefully we can appreciate these differences. Okay? So now there are quite some application of awareness to game theory, decision theory, contract theory, industrial organization, political economy, and I will mention some maybe briefly. And so now if you're interested in looking up some of these papers, I basically collect them on my website. And now if you write a paper on awareness, please email it me as well. Okay. So let me go further. Okay, so before I jump to the modeling approaches, I want to quickly discuss how we actually talk about awareness in real life. So here's a sentence: I was aware of the red traffic light. Okay, so this is not the notion of awareness that actually we look at in our formal approaches, because here somehow awareness is used like knowledge. Okay, so you knew that the traffic light was red in some sense. The next sentence is maybe closer to what we have in mind in our formal approaches. Be aware of sexually transmitted diseases. Okay, so this basically has the connotation of generally taking into account, being present in mind, and this is actually being present in mind is how Monica Rusticchini originally thought about awareness, or maybe paying attention to. Okay, and this is closer to what we want to model. Now, where does aware come from, this word? Well, it comes from very. So if you take something into account, you should start worrying about it and take it. You shouldn't assign zero probability to it in some sense. And this comes from Gewehr, and actually from the old, or from German Gewahr, basically. In psychiatry, we also have a kind of notion of awareness. There they talk about self-awareness. And lack of self-awareness means that the patient is oblivious to aspects of an illness that he has, and that it's obvious to her social surrounding. So this has to do, if you think about this, then this is something like failure of negative introspection. Okay, so the patient doesn't know that he has the illness, and he doesn't even realize that he doesn't know this. And as it turns out, actually, there is an interesting connection also in the formal approaches between the lack of awareness and the failure of negative introspection. Okay, so just to come back to our formal notion of awareness, so intuitively what we want to model is, so unawareness as the, we want to interpret it as the lack of conception, that we cannot conceive of some events. Okay. Now, there are many different approaches to modeling awareness, and it's very hard to introduce the details of all these approaches in 1 hour. Okay, so I thought about how to do this, so I thought, okay, let's take one example, okay, and then basically illustrate all these approaches with this example, okay? And so along the way, I will introduce the main features of these different modeling approaches, and we can see the similarities and differences. So the example that I want to fix and that you can keep in mind during the talk is a speculative trade. So now what do we mean by speculative trade? Well, speculative trade is trade based on information. So you think you know something and you want to use this to speculate, to trade with others. Okay, so it could be that you think you have some information advantage and you now want to use this to trade. So this is different from other kinds of trade, like you need some money now and you have to sell something. Okay, so this would be a different kind of trade. So speculative trade is just trade where you try to use your information to trade. Okay. So I would like to have a simple story, a simple example that we then want to formalize with these different approaches. So here's the example. There are two agents, one owner. Okay, the owner is always blue, and then there's a potential buyer. It's always red. And there is a firm. Okay, so the owner owns a firm, and the potential buyer is interested in buying it. And we assume that the status quo value of the firm is 100 rupees. Okay, so you can think of this per share, if you like. Okay. Now, the owner is aware of a potential lawsuit that may be, that the firm may be involved in the future. And that may cost the firm 20 rupees. Okay? So to the owner, the value of the firm is either 100 or 80. Okay? And he also knows that the buyer is actually unaware of this. Okay? So the buyer doesn't think about this. For the buyer, he's aware of a potential innovation that may enhance the value of the firm by 20 rupees. So to the buyer, the value of the firm is either 100 rupees or 120 rupees. And she knows that the owner actually is unaware of this potential innovation. Okay? So the owner doesn't think of this innovation that actually could enhance the value of the firm. Okay? And basically, now we can think about this. Okay? So one question we can pose, suppose that the buyer is offering to buy the firm for 100 rupees. Is the owner going to sell to her? Okay? So this is something that we may want to analyze. Okay? And now I would like to take these different approaches and simply basically put this story into these approaches, and we can see some of these modeling features. Okay? Okay, so first approach. So the first approach is Fagenhalper 88. So they introduced these awareness structures. What is an awareness structure? An awareness structure is a Kripke structure with some additional structure, namely an awareness correspondence. So, so let's start. Okay, so let's have a language. Okay, so now we have some set of atomic formulas, and then here's the grammar. So we have atomic formulas, negation, conjunction. Then we have an explicit knowledge operator, an implicit knowledge operator, and an awareness operator. And they're indexed by the agents. Okay, so we have n agents in a general setting. So here we only have 2 agents. Okay. So what is an awareness structure? So we have a set of states, okay, and actually for this example I need just 4 states, okay. So I put them, so this is our space of states, so 4 states. Then for each agent we have an accessibility relation, okay. Here in this example it's very simple because every state is accessible from every other state by every agent. So basically, instead of having a completely connected graph, I just put these possibility sets. Okay, it's easier to depict in the picture. Okay, so this is the possibility set of the buyer in red and in blue of the owner. Okay, so they consider every state possible. Okay, and then we have an awareness correspondence. Okay, so this assigns to each state a subset of formulas that the agent is aware of at this state. Okay, so we have for each agent we have an awareness correspondence, and here in this picture I depict this with these bubbles basically. So for each state there is this bubble that is the awareness set at this state, and here in this state the buyer basically just want to talk about how we do this for these operators. So implicit knowledge is defined as not knowledge. Okay, so the agent, so agent I implicitly knows formula phi. It has an awareness structure M, but only if phi is true in every state, that it is acceptable by the ES. Okay, and the awareness operator is as follows. So agent I is aware of phi that it has an awareness structure. And even only if phi is in the awareness set of the agent I at the state S. Okay. And then explicit knowledge is then defined by implicit knowledge and awareness. Okay, so you explicitly know phi. Basically, so Halper and Halper-Rigaud, they provide sound and complete axiomatizations of these awareness structures under various assumptions of on the accessibility relation. So you may think of whether you have partitioner knowledge or not. So you can look at various notions of knowledge, and also various assumptions on the awareness correspondence. Here we have very special cases in this example. Okay, but you can look at this in general. Now let me skip the details here a little bit because I want to illustrate some modeling features here. So first of all, this example this example models our story, so you can look at this. So first of all, we can see that the buyer is aware of any innovation, but not aware of anything not to do with lawsuit, because his awareness correspondence only at any state only contains formulas that are built on primitive propositions and that involve innovation but not lawsuit. And similar, the owner is unaware of, so in any state, the owner actually is unaware of anything that has to do with innovation. Okay? Also, actually, the buyer knows that the owner is unaware of innovations, because he considers all these states possible, and in all these states, he implicitly knows that the owner is not unaware of innovation, and since he is aware of innovation by himself, he actually also explicitly knows that the owner is unaware of innovation. Okay, so now this simple example actually models this story just with 4 states. Okay, now so here's something that I would like to illustrate a little bit, and we are basically also yes. So the accessibility relation models implicit knowledge here. Okay, so this is his accessibility relation that corresponds to implicit knowledge in this awareness structure. And you may want to think about whether you could actually have a setting where the accessibility relation models the explicit knowledge of the buyer and the owner. And then it would look different, but we come to this. Okay, so yes. Okay, I hope this answers your question. Okay.
Think of this as observational. So the buyer can observationally distinguish between the top states and the they would know if the innovation has occurred.
Well, okay, so in the story that I have, the innovation, now these events didn't occur yet, okay? So both are so the buyer is uncertain whether there is innovation or not, but he's aware of it, okay? And the owner is uncertain whether there will be a lawsuit or not, but he's aware that there could be this lawsuit, okay? So in this sense, they cannot distinguish yet whether this occurred or not, okay? Okay, so think about the following sentence, okay? The buyer, okay? I implicitly know that the owner is aware of the lawsuit, but unfortunately, I'm unaware of the lawsuit, okay? So this sounds a bit paradoxically, okay? Why? Because actually I put it in a first-person perspective, okay? It's hard to imagine that actually the buyer can utter this because he's unaware of the lawsuit, so how could he even reason like this, okay? This illustrates a feature here, namely, if you think about this structure is easy to interpret from a third-person perspective, namely from a perspective of an outside observer. Okay, an outside observer can say, okay, well, the buyer implicitly knows that the owner is aware, of the lawsuit, but he's unaware of it. Okay, but from the first-order perspective, it's very hard to interpret this the structure as a structure that the agent himself could use to analyze the situation. Okay, so an outside observer may use this to analyze the situation, but for the agent himself, it's very hard to think that actually the agent himself can use this structure to analyze this situation. Okay, now so. It models basically reasoning of an outside observer about knowledge and awareness of agents, but it doesn't model the agent's subjective reasoning that economists, decision theorists, and also game theorists are often interested in. So in game theory, in standard game theory, this is not an issue because if you think about the game, okay, then so you have a description of the game, and maybe players have different information, but they all can use the same description of the game to analyze the situation, okay? But the moment you introduce unawareness, some agents, some players may be unaware of certain features of the game, like certain actions or certain events that may affect the payoffs and so on. And then the question is, what is the now what does one agent think how the other agent analyzes the situation? Okay, so we would like to have something where we can really can interpret the states as states of mind of the agent in some sense. Okay. And now this has to do, of course, with implicit knowledge also. Yes, okay. So this is one point. The second point I want to say, the semantics is not really syntax-free in the following sense that you always have this syntactic awareness correspondence. So at each state, basically, you have some set of formulas that you're aware of, and it's very hard to think of basically an analog to a Kripke frame or to an Aumann structure in a sense. And I'll address this in the next slide. Okay, but the good thing of these awareness structures is they're very flexible. Okay, so they're very, very flexible. Now you can actually model many different notions of awareness with them. Actually, some of the notions that economists should be interested in but never explored. Okay, so recently economists got interested in how they can frame decision problems in a better way so that people make better decisions. Okay, like we know that often people make poor decisions on their retirement plans. Okay, and maybe if we can present the information about retirement plans differently to the people, then they could make better decisions. So, for example, what kind of options we want to put first, what we want to put second, etc. So we have some kind of so we could basically present this information in very different way, like what are opt-in, opt-out options, and so on. And basically, now with these awareness structures, you can study many different kinds of framing, actually. So, for example, you could have cases where phi and psi is in the awareness set of the agent at S, but psi and phi is not. Okay, so you could have a very interesting. So you could actually study the very interesting framing effects. And well, I think in future this should be explored because actually economists find this relevant. And for these framing effects, you actually want to take often the third-person perspective because it's basically a paternalistic approach. So you want to analyze, an agent that could be framed and how you may want to put the frame so that the agent makes certain decisions. So for this kind of situations, actually, these awareness structures may be very, very good. Okay, so so this is about awareness structures. Now, what I want to say, I want to say something about this one. Okay, I want to ask basically. What is the problem with Kripke frames and unawareness? So, why can't we just use a Kripke structure to model unawareness, or a Kripke frame to model unawareness? So, now let's fix a state space S. Okay, just a state space. And now instead of an accessibility relation, I jump immediately to an operator on set of states. Okay. On the set of subset of states. So we may have a knowledge operator. So if you have a set of states E, for example, then K of E is the event that the agent I knows E. This should be the interpretation. Okay, so it's an operator on events, and of course we will impose some conditions on this in order to interpret it as knowledge. And then we may have a second operator, which you call the unawareness operator, which is also an operator on events. And if you have an event E, so a set of states E, then Ui of E is the event that the agent I knows. Ui of E is the event that agent I is unaware of the event E. Okay. And now we want to impose some properties. So here's one property, which is a very weak property, namely necessitation. So the agent always knows the state space. Okay, so if you think about notions of knowledge like S5, S4, or if you think about probabilistic beliefs or ambiguity, they all satisfy this condition. Okay, and then we have 3 other properties on the unawareness operator. So first, if the individual is unaware of an event E, then he doesn't know the event E, and he doesn't know that he doesn't know the event E. So it's failure of negative introspection. Then the next property is he never knows that he's unaware of an event E. So knowing that you're unaware of an event E is a contradiction. And the last condition is if you're unaware of an event E, then you're unaware that you're unaware of an event E. So this may be 3 properties that you may want to impose on unawareness. Okay, but the problem is that if you have a state space model, okay, and this very weak notion of knowledge, okay, and you think that these are conditions on unawareness that are justified, then basically you cannot be unaware of any event. Okay, so if you just think about Kripke frames, so then it's basically you cannot model unawareness just with a standard Kripke frame, and the proof is very simple. It's just a one-line thing. Okay, so this is what economists. So economists often they look at state space models, Aumann structures, or type spaces, and they basically thought maybe at the beginning they thought maybe we can model unawareness just by weakening the notion of knowledge in some sense. But then they realized actually as long as we have one state space, it will be still very difficult. Okay. Now, what I want to do now is I want to introduce a third approach. So you may ask, okay, where's the second approach? Okay. I will talk about the second approach a little later. So I want to introduce a third approach first. And in the third approach, we will have a syntax-free semantics, and we can also model basically the subjective perception of the agents. Okay. Okay. So these are unawareness structures. So what is an unawareness structure? An unawareness structure consists of a complete lattice of spaces. So it's not just one state space anymore, but it's a complete lattice of spaces. So here's an example of a space. So we have 4 states, and I index this state space already with some suggestive index, basically. So here we can think of this space as being able to model both innovation and lawsuits. And then we may look at poorer state spaces, okay? So less rich state spaces, okay? And we get a complete lattice. So we may have a state space where we can only talk about innovation, and another state space where we can only talk about lawsuits. And here we cannot talk about any of these events. Okay, so this is in this example it may look like this, or in our speculative trade example. Now, if you have these many state spaces, we have to say if something happens in one state space, what happens in another state space. Okay, so we introduce projections. So now subjective projections from higher spaces to lower spaces. So in this example, it may look like this. So these 2 states project to that, and this project to this one. And of course, the composition is defined. Okay. Now, these projections, they give rise to an event structure. Okay. So an event in a standard state space is just a subset of states. But here we have many state spaces. Okay. So what is an event here? Well, of course, so these are all the projections. Okay. So we can look at events. So we can fix a state, for example. Okay, and so here, for example, this may be a state where the lawsuit obtains. Okay, and now we want to collect all the states where actually the lawsuit obtains. Okay, so we can look at the inverse. We can take the projections, or we can use the projections and look at the inverse image, and get basically these states here. And then the event that the lawsuit obtains may be these three states in this example. Okay? If you want to look at the negation of the event the lawsuit does not obtain, okay, then what we do is we look at the relative complement of this subset with respect to this space. So we get this red state here, and then we look at the inverse image. Okay, and so this is the negation of the event that the lawsuit obtains. So this is when the lawsuit may not obtain. Okay, in this example. Okay, so we have this kind of special event structure. Okay, now I want to introduce the accessibility relations or the possibility correspondence. So I take off the projections because otherwise it's getting too complicated, the picture. So here's a possibility correspondence. So this is not analog to accessibility relations, but this is often used in economics. So for each state, it assigns a subset of states that the agent thinks possible, but since we have these many spaces, we also have to say in which space this subset of states lies. Okay? So it could be that in these states up here, the possibility set of the owner actually lies in this space. So basically in any state here, the states that he thinks possible are states only in this space where he can talk about lawsuit but not about innovation. And in states where we can talk about innovations but not lawsuit, the possibility correspondence of the owner may be down here where he cannot talk about lawsuit and innovation. Okay? And similar for the buyer, we may have this possibility correspondence. Okay? Only that the buyer's possibility correspondence is now confined, at these states the possibility set is now confined to this space. So so he can think about innovation, and at the states where we can talk about lawsuit, actually he thinks about neither innovation nor lawsuit. Okay? So this is a possibility correspondence, and then we may have a valuation that basically assigns atomic formulas to events in the structure. Okay. Now, how can we model knowledge? So knowledge in this just in this frame is just the Aumann knowledge operator. Only that we have now here many spaces, but basically an agent knows the event E in all the states where he thinks the event E is possible. And awareness now is defined basically by, so an agent I is aware of the event E in all the states where his possibility set is on a space where we can talk about the event E. So S of E, I didn't introduce this notation, so S of E is the lower space where we can talk about this event E, and this up arrow means it may be actually also the inverse images. So we take this space and then the union of the inverse images in higher spaces. Okay, so this would be then states where we can actually talk about the event E. Okay, so the moment his possibility set is on a space where we can talk about the event E, he's aware of it. Okay. Now, this example here of an unawareness structure models our story. Okay. So, in particular, at any state here, okay, the owner's possibility set is on this space where he can only talk about innovation. So he's unaware of lawsuit. So the buyer. Sorry, the buyer. And for the owner, he can only think about lawsuit. And now, if you think about what the buyer thinks about the owner, okay? So in any state that the buyer considers possible, at those states, okay? So at any state that the buyer considers possible, the possibility correspondence says that the owner's possibility set is down here, and here the owner is not aware of lawsuit or innovation. So the buyer knows that the owner is unaware of innovation. Okay. Notice that here the possibility correspondence models explicit knowledge, not implicit knowledge. Actually, we don't have implicit knowledge here defined. Okay, so we don't have. We also don't have an implicit knowledge operator here. Okay. Now, how can we think about the subjective perceptions of the agents? Okay, so we can actually use the sublattice as subjective perceptions of the situations. So, of course, this whole structure that the analyst can use to analyze the situation. But if you think about if the agent would go to the analyst and say, well, please give me a formal model of my state of mind, okay, then the analyst could do for the buyer the following. He could simply take this sublattice for the buyer, okay? So he looks at these states, the possibility set is here, and then he basically looks at the sublattice where the highest space is the space where the possibility set of the agent is defined. Okay, so we can represent the subjective state of mind basically here or we can think of this as also the subjective descriptions that the agents use to actually analyze the situation. It's syntax free, so we don't need it, and so Heifetz-Meyer-Schipper, but also Halper and Rigaud, they provide sound and complete axiomatizations. For these unawareness structures, one has to be a bit careful with the notion of validity. Okay, so you cannot really read this, but the issue is the following. So in a Kripke structure, a formula is valid if it's true in every state. But here, some formulas may not be even defined at all states. So we have to generalize the notion of validity, and the notion of validity is then a formula is valid in an unawareness structure if it's true in every state where it is defined. And of course, if this unawareness structure is a Kripke structure, namely we only have one space, then it's the standard notion of validity. Okay, but with this you can basically it's pretty straightforward to do this axiomatizations. Okay, how much time do I have? Actually, probably 25 minutes. Okay. So now I skipped the second approach because the second approach is the second approach is by Monica Ostechini in 1999. They call it general standard structures or general standard models, and these are models that are for single agents only. So we cannot really model our situation here because we have two agents. Okay, but you can understand these general standard models as single agent versions of the approach that I just introduced. Okay, so we can model basically the situation for one agent with this. So they have an objective state space and a subjective state space, and so it's basically a single person version of our approach, of the unawareness structure approach. And the paper is very important because it introduced a particular definition of awareness, namely you're aware of a formula phi. It's defined as knowing formula phi or knowing that you do not know. Okay, so so you see the connection to introspection. So this notion of awareness makes a lot of sense, especially if you have partitional information structures. Okay. So Monica Ostechini proved a sound complete axiomatization for their general standard models, and they use a notion of objective validity. So they say a formula is valid in a general standard model if it's true in every objective state. So only in these states, which is a bit, okay, so it's a bit questionable maybe. So now, so since it's just a single agent thing, it models reasoning of an outside observer about knowledge and awareness of a single agent. Yes, so it was a kind of intermediate step, I would say, in the literature. Okay, so there is a fourth approach. So there are many more approaches, but here's a fourth approach, which is by Lee. She calls this product models. And her approach is a little different at first, you may think. But actually it's very, very similar to these other approaches. So she starts with a set of questions. Okay? And now this makes sense in an awareness context because if you're aware of something, you can ask questions about it, right? So you can, if you're aware, if you can think about something, then you could formulate questions about it. If you're unaware of it, you cannot even raise a question about it. Okay, so thinking as so taking at the basic as a primitive a set of questions actually makes quite some sense in this setting. So she takes a set of questions, and then she uses them to define states. Okay, so questions can be answered in the affirmative or the negative. So 1 stands for affirmative, 0 for negative. And then basically a state is simply a tuple saying, okay, whether the question Q is answered in affirmative or negative, okay, for all these questions. Okay. So she can build this, what she calls a set of objective states, okay, by simply saying which questions are answered in the affirmative or negative. And then she introduces an awareness correspondence. She calls it a little different, I think. And also she has a different notation, but I use this A notation to basically illustrate the similarities. So this awareness correspondence assigns to each state, to each objective state, a subset of questions that the agent is aware of. Okay? And again, I illustrate this by these bubbles. So the buyer can raise questions about novelty, about the innovation, and the owner can raise questions about the lawsuit. And then she introduces a possibility correspondence, which is the analog to an accessibility relation. So it doesn't really matter whether you take accessibility relation or possibility correspondence. So it assigns to each state a subset of state that the agent thinks possible. So here, this is the buyer's possibility set, and this is the owner's possibility set. Okay. So far it looks very similar to an awareness structure, but she does a little more. So okay, so I have to say something. So her model is actually a single person model. So she couldn't model this situation too, but there's an unpublished version of it where she tries to do a multi-agent setting, and we can try to use this multi-agent setting to illustrate this example. Or we can illustrate the multi-agent setting with this example. So for this, she introduces more state spaces. So I need some more space to introduce the state spaces. So here is the same state space, just ordered a little different. Okay. So what she introduces are subjective state spaces. So basically, what she does what she does, she takes a state and then asks, okay, what are the questions that the agent is aware of at the state? And then using this set of questions, she can build potentially a smaller state space. Okay? And these are the subjective state spaces for her. So she can, so this is the buyer's subjective state space. This is the owner's subjective state space. And then we can also ask, well, what would be the owner's subjective state space of the buyer's subjective state space? So you can do this hierarchical, and you get this kind of lattice structure. So you see the similarity to the earlier structure. And then she extends the awareness correspondence and the possibility correspondence to these subjective state spaces. So again, actually, what she models is implicit knowledge here, not explicit knowledge. So in this sense, it's very similar to awareness structures, but she has this many state spaces, so it's very similar to this unawareness structure. It's something in between. So this example models our story. So this I said already. So she can, because she has the lattice structure, she can actually represent the subjective perceptions of the situation of the agents. And so she doesn't provide an axiomatization of this, but she proves some properties about unawareness and knowledge in her paper. Okay, so this is a fourth approach. Now, there are many more approaches, but I think I should not introduce all of them because we run out of time otherwise. So I want to quickly say something about the evolution of these approaches and how they relate to each other. So how they, so in time, how they occurred and how they relate to each other. And we can simply divide them into different, so by these features. So there are single agent approaches, then there are multi-agent approaches, and then there are some, the Q is cut off here, so some that actually allow for quantification, which is especially important if you want to talk about awareness of unawareness. Okay, so you may want to have things like, I do not know whether there exists an event that I'm unaware of. Okay, so this kind of statements make sense, so you may want to reason about this, and for this you need to allow for quantification, and I didn't talk about this yet, but there are approaches that allow this. So, here's how we can look at the literature. Okay, so first, of course, there was Fagen-Halpern with awareness structures in '88. Then early on there was a connection discovered to possible impossible worlds, so they are equal expressible. And then Modica-Rosticchini came, okay, so this is the second approach, a single person approach. And actually there's one paper that is completely ignored that also actually does something like this, which I recently found only, an unpublished paper. And then Joe Halpern worked at the connection between Fagen-Halpern and Modica-Rosticchini. So if you restrict awareness structures to awareness structures where awareness is generated by primitive propositions, where basically, so as the name says, awareness really is determined by primitive propositions. Then in the single agent case, you can show some equal expressivity between general standard models and single agent models. Actually, so one has to be careful. So Modica-Rosticchini only looked at something, looked at an analog to partitional knowledge, and Fagen-Halpern, they are more general. So they also look at non-partitional information structures. Then some other economists worked on something that is also largely ignored. So there are some papers that occurred sometimes where the connection is not clear yet. Then these unawareness structures came as a kind of awareness neighborhood models, and you can also do this quantified. So Zilari worked on this. Then Halpern and Rigaud have a paper where they look at propositional quantification to model basically awareness of unawareness. Then Lee came with the multi-agent setting. Bort and Chung have first-order object-based approach to unawareness in order to model also awareness of unawareness. Then there were some extensions. Actually, if you take the non-quantified version, so of Bort and Chung, you can prove actually in some sense, some equal expressivity. So there are some small issues. And yeah, so then Feinberg has kind of generalization. Well, it's not clear what it is, but it's connected to Halpern and Rigaud. And then Heinz Salo worked at the connection between Lee and Halpern for the single agent case. So we know this connection. Okay, so this is how the literature evolved. Of course, there's many more which I didn't really discuss. So you can also think about awareness in a probabilistic setting, and for game theory that's very important. If you think about Bayesian games, so games with incomplete information, so there is work on this. Then the awareness of unawareness I mentioned briefly before, and then of course there is a literature on dynamic awareness. So there are also different approaches, and I think Hans will talk about this actually. Okay, so I want to return to the speculative trait example, okay, because we used the different approaches to. We use this example to illustrate these different approaches, but I didn't give you an answer, whether they would trade or not, and how we can think about this. Okay, so I would like to basically give you an answer there. Okay, so say that at a state S, an agent is willing to trade at the price of X rupees if either she strictly prefers to trade at X rupees or she's indifferent between trading or not at X rupees. So we say that an agent is willing to trade at a state S if he really likes to trade or he's just indifferent. Okay? Now, observe that at 100 rupees, both agents are willing to trade in every state, in every structure that are introduced so far. Okay, so they are, in every state they would be willing to trade. Okay. Now, this is actually also common knowledge among the agents at all states in every structure that are introduced so far. Okay. Now, in awareness structures, each agent has also a strict preference to trade in all states. Okay? So it's common knowledge that there's willingness to trade, but actually also each agent has a strict preference to trade. So of course, then they would like to trade actually, because I know that you're willing to trade, and it's common knowledge, and actually I have a strict preference to trade, and you have a strict preference to trade, so we may as well trade actually. So in this sense, speculative trade is possible. Okay? And in unawareness structures, but also in Lie, each agent has a strict preference to trade except in the lowest space. In the lowest space, agents are actually indifferent to trade. Okay? And the states in the lowest space are the states of mind of an agent as viewed by the other agent. Okay? So if I think about you, whether you want to trade, then I don't think that you have a strict preference to trade. What I think is that you're just indifferent to trade. Okay? So I have a strict preference to trade. I know that we would be willing to trade. And what I think about you is that you're actually indifferent between trading or not. Okay? So in this sense, speculative trade is possible. Okay, so under unawareness, actually, speculation may be possible. And this is in contrast to standard structures without unawareness, because there are no trade theorems that are connected to Aumann's disagreement theorem say that if there's common knowledge of willingness to trade, then both must be indifferent to trade. Okay? But here we have common knowledge of willingness to trade, and each has a strict preference to trade. Okay? So in this sense, speculative trade is possible. Okay? Now, in another paper, we generalize this. Okay? And we prove a no-trade theorem even for these unawareness structures. Namely, we show that if there's common knowledge of willingness to trade, that it cannot be common knowledge that both have a strict preference to trade. So you may have a strict preference to trade, but what you think that the other person, if you think about the preference of the other person, he just is indifferent to trade. Okay? So you cannot have common knowledge of strict preference to trade. Okay? So this means in particular that arbitrary small transaction costs, like a Tobin tax, would rule out speculation under unawareness. Okay? Now I have to qualify this a little bit because we show this in the probabilistic unawareness structure because so you have to be a bit more careful. So there is an assumption also then that there is a common Breyer. Okay. Yes. Okay. Now let me finish up with some remarks on applications. So there are some applications. So there are quite some papers on dynamic games with awareness nowadays. So if you're interested in game theory, in doing game theory with unawareness, there are general approaches to this by Hyper and Rigaud. But also we have some papers on this, and there are a couple of other papers. Then Bayesian games with unawareness have been developed also. Then kind of communication of agent has been analyzed under unawareness, but certain kind of communication, namely where you can communicate only verifiable information. So if you say something, you cannot lie, but you may not say everything. Okay, so you may strategically keep quiet on certain issues. Okay, and then the question is under which situations all the awareness is unraveled and when not. So this has been analyzed in different settings. So disclosure of verifiable information. Then there have been approaches to contract theory, like via certain contracts incomplete. Why there are certain contract disputes and how we design incentives for agents that may be unaware of something. So you may make him aware of certain things, but then you also have to take care of his incentive constraints, that he has then additional incentive constraints. So this causes some interesting trade-offs. Then there are a few papers on decision theory and awareness where, so here they try to look at something like how beliefs are updated when you become aware of something, and how we can reveal this with decision theoretic experiments. Then there's an application to political economy, and there are also applications to exchange economies. Okay, so there are some applications, and I think in the future there will be more. Okay, so this is more or less what I have to say. So I hope you get some idea about these different approaches and what is done in this literature. And if you're interested, then please talk to me, and I can tell you more. Okay, thank you very much. Yes.
Well, in the trade example, instead of just quoting prices,
Yes.
If suppose you were to make bids, would so that you have a sequence of bids, would you be able to become aware of what you were unaware of? I mean, in the sense that when I come to buy, I expect that you have some information that I'm unaware of, and the fact that I'm coming to buy, you expect that I have some information that you're unaware of.
Well, so
we could just have a sequence of bids, right?
Yes, yes. Okay, so here in this setting, the fact that we trade will not reveal any information to you and any awareness to you, because there's common knowledge that we are willing to trade. So the fact that you are willing to trade with me doesn't change my mind. Okay, but suppose we don't use 100 rupees at the price we trade. So suppose that there's some small transaction cost that we actually have to pay when we trade. So basically, if I buy the firm for $100, I have to pay a tax of $1. Okay. Now, basically, you know that if I buy the firm, I pay $101 and not just 101 rupees and not just 100 rupees. And now you think that there's something fishy. Why is he willing to basically pay more than what I expect him? He thinks that the firm is worth. Okay, and then of course you may have, or you better have a dynamic model where you think about how awareness is changed by this and so on. Yes, but here in this example, which is a knife edge example of this $100, and this is the only way you can actually get speculative trade under unawareness. So that's interesting. So we have this no trade theorems without unawareness. Okay, and you would think that if you have asymmetric awareness that you could use this for speculation a lot, but actually you cannot really. So there's a knife edge case where you can use it for speculation, but you can prove basically a generalized no trade theorem. Okay. Yes?
It strikes me that if you only make the example of the speculative trade, the awareness is actually about, it strikes me that the unawareness there is about actions, where this unawareness is modeled as unawareness about propositions, saying, so in the original motivation for the awareness and unawareness is dynamic, but it's modeled by propositional variables. Isn't that striking?
Okay, so what are the actions of the agent, trade or not? That's the action, right? So, and they are aware of this, right? You can trade or not. So it's really the event or some underlying events that affect your payoffs or expectations. This is what you're unaware of.
True, and also is currently taking place, and that is really a proposition to the priority.
But it's not an action that the agent have in this sense. So this is like a zero-sum game. Okay, so you trade or not, you have two actions.
But is it also unawareness about some litigation actions that other agents
okay. Yes, but yes. Okay. So what you may want to do is you may want to put in additional players that have these actions about litigation, okay, And then you may model this about now with awareness of action. So in the dynamic game models with unawareness, basically there we model awareness of actions basically a lot. So basically, if you like to model this, you can do this with this dynamic games with unawareness. Yes. So. Yes, so I can tell you more. Yes. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, so then I thank you very much. Thank you.